So let's see if over the next hour or so we can convince ourselves that that is a real possibility. To do it, we need a panel which brings together expertise from different sides of this debate, and I'm delighted to say that's exactly what we've got. So what I'm going to do now is introduce to you our panel members. And panelists, we can see you on a screen now, so I want you just to raise a hand and give a friendly wave when I mention your name, because then everybody around the world is going to be clear who is who. So, in no order at all, let us welcome Benedikt Bösel, who is CEO and founder of Guten Bösel, which is a big farming enterprise. Erik Vierwald, who is the CEO of Syngenta Group. Marian Jansen, Director of the Trade and Agriculture Directorate at the OECD in Paris. And Carina Millstone, who is Executive Director of Feedback Global, and Carina has a long track record in academia and NGOs, including, I think, a marvelous scheme to build or create orchards in urban areas across the world. So a terrific panel with a lot of different experience. Panelists, I want you first to reflect on the big theme and on the way it was laid out by Catherine Bertini. She was emphasizing inclusivity, the responsibility of all the different stakeholders to actually make real commitment right now. So Benedikt Bösel, I'm going to start with you. You're a farmer. You're sort of a technologist as well. Tell me how you believe farmers can be a hugely significant part of this broader discussion.
Well, to be honest with you, I think they are the only solution and the only people that can actually do it. So I think, you know, currently what we experience is a lot of chat about this topic. And going back to the statement, it is quite beautiful to see that we seem to have understood that agriculture is potentially the biggest solution to many of the big problems that we are facing in the world. I think that for itself already is something that we have worked for, and we are now able to talk about how that can be basically laid out in terms of solutions. But I think what is important to understand is that the only people who can actually do the change and do what we all want them to do is the farmers. So it's not really about what can the farmers do for us with regards to health, biodiversity, climate adaptation, but it's what can we do for the farmers. And to give you a bit more perspective on this, I think it is important to understand many of the situations that farmers are in. And of course, they're very heterogeneous, so it's difficult to basically throw them in a pot. But as far as I can tell, there's really three different forms that farmers are in at this point. They're either, you know, having difficulties earning an income as it is, so they're fighting or struggling to survive day in, day out. So we cannot expect them to make the change. Volker Engelsmann, the CEO of Veosta, always says, you cannot think green if your figures are red. That is one part. The other part is, in certain areas in the world, having great soil, the right amount of rain, and then on top of that might even get subsidies. So this group is earning, you know, enough money. They're having a good life. Why would they have to change? And the huge middle part, and I think that's the most important one, they are stuck in a system. They are already trying to develop. They are already testing new methodologies, but they cannot get out of it because they are not independent anymore. They are too strongly in debt. They have decided on certain specializations, which now is difficult to get out of. And of course, the emotional side of it also plays a huge role. So I think we have to consider those different situations that the people are in. And the question becomes, how can we do the systematic change that we need? And that, for me, can only come through empowering the independent pioneers that actually show on the farm level what is possible and how it can be achieved. And we also have to make sure that we have problem-oriented research, because education is key. We need the education to help farmers to actually find ways of working more in line with nature, becoming less dependent, and hopefully also driving down debt. And I think there is basically one very important part of that. That is true cost accounting. We need to be able to, on one side, monetize and monitor the costs of production with regards to ecosystem, to health, the rural community and so forth. But also we have to be able to value the actual values that are being created, water retention, biodiversity, nutrient density in food and so forth. I think only then do we have the tools in order to compare different ways of doing farming in different areas. So I think what is incredibly important at the end of the day is the question, how can we get young people on the farm and on the land? And for me, there's only one way, that is healthy ecosystems, it is affordable land, it is the right education at the right time, and it is not companies that are getting more and more control, making farmers more and more dependent, and having on their sole propriety profit maximization. I think we need to value ecosystem functions and social matters just as much as we do all the others. So I'm grateful for the invitation and happy in this group because I absolutely agree. The only way how we can do it is together and in a positive narrative. But that means we all have to take a step back and look at our values. But I think we're getting there.
Benedict, thank you very much. And I want to move on to the rest of the panel in just a moment. But before I do, I'm just intrigued to know which group of farmers you put yourself in. You described some farmers who are very happy with the status quo, others who would like to make a change but economically find it very difficult. And then there's a group of farmers who, frankly, are just more concerned about subsistence and eking out a living than anything else. I'm guessing you put yourself in, well, either group one or group two, but just explain to me which group you're in and whether you feel as a farmer that you have anything in common with farmers in the developing world, in economies which are really challenging and struggling, where the context is so very different from your own.
I mean, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, with regards to those groups, I can tell you straight away, I am in the bracket that is struggling to survive every day. We have sandy soil and incredibly low precipitation in our area. So we have to fight each day, day in, day out. And, you know, on top of that, we are faced with Corona, we have African swine flu, we have bird flu, we have the third year of drought. So I know what it feels like to you know, having problems to sleep, being responsible for 30 plus families. And this is the reason why I care so much. This is the reason why I do everything that I do and why I risk everything that I have in order to find solutions and offer ways of getting out of this. And with regards to the second part of the question, you're completely right. I mean, I live in my bubble, of course, and it's still an incredibly privileged bubble. I am aware of that. But I think where we all kind of connect as far as farmers is concerned is that we are on the bottom of a pyramid, but the pyramid is upside down. So we have all the risks, we have all the worries, we have no chance of doing anything but trying to get what we can in terms of inputs and machines and so forth, and hoping for nature to somehow support us. And any company, any association, any political law is put upon us, and we have no power in addressing that somehow. So I think what is just so incredibly important, and I cannot stress this enough, is we have to, you know, instead of saying farmers should be doing this or farmers should be doing that, or why don't they also do this, we have to say, oh my God, thank you guys so much. What do you need from us? You need education, you need capital, you can have it all because you are the solution to a healthy ecosystem in the future and no one else really.
Okay, well that's a terrific opening, Benedict. Thank you very much. I want to bring Marion Jansen in now. Marion, there you are at the OECD, which people will be familiar with for the economic reporting you do. Essentially, a membership group which is of the more prosperous and developed world countries than of the poorer developing world countries. You've just heard the message from Benedict that farmers bear all of the burden, all of the responsibility, have such a dominantly important place in the global food system, but aren't, you know, in a position to engineer transformation. They need help, and they need help particularly from political leadership, from big corporates as well. Tell me from your perspective at the OECD whether the system is working, particularly with regard to our conversation topic today, which is linking food system renewal to recognition of the climate change challenge. You know, our governments, is the corporate sector stepping up here and helping farmers in the way that Benedict hopes they will?
No, I think our organization is an international organization, so I have to give diplomatic answers. So my diplomatic answer is the system hasn't been working that badly, but can be improved. There are definitely challenges ahead. And we take these challenges very seriously. That's why we have a directorate that has a strong focus on agricultural policies. That's why we have been collecting for decades information on government support to the private sector, trying to to the agricultural sector, trying to understand whether it is helping farmers or rather distorting competition. And this is why a lot of our work in this year has been focusing on food systems and how to make them work better. Now, Benedict has talked a lot about one of the challenges that we look at under this food systems work. It's the challenge to guarantee incomes for farmers, for those living off the farm. But we are seeing two additional challenges. One is to make farming environmentally sustainable, and that may sometimes lead to additional costs for farmers. That's one of the things that Benedict is maybe struggling with. And that's not everything. Incomes for farmers, second challenge, environmental sustainability, and third, at a global level, we need to provide sufficient nutrition and quality nutrition to a growing population. Now, three objectives, that's complex. Three objectives you typically cannot meet with one policy. You typically need a policy mix. We would typically want to think of a mix of three policies, three challenges, three policies, but even that is too easy. And then you have to make those policies work along the value chain, as has been said in the introductory video. This has to set the right incentives, not only for producers, but also for distribution and for consumption at the end. So we are in a complex setting, in particular if you keep in mind that not all the policies will be managed by one ministry. Sometimes multiple ministries are involved, and that's what makes it difficult to design the right policies. I told you I've been discussing, collecting information on producer support to agriculture for 3 decades. For 3 decades, we have been saying the support is too high, and in particular, it's too distortive. And unfortunately, the adjustment has happened, but we believe too slowly.
I mean, in the EU in particular, in decades gone by, there's been a feeling that the system of supports and subsidies does not really work in the interests of anybody. Farmers are generally often quite unhappy with it, but the general public and the taxpayers are even more unhappy with it and feel that frankly, it's skewed towards the interests of a small part of the population involved in the rural economy and food production. Do you get a sense the EU now has a much clearer-headed approach to food system issues, where to put support to make it both more sort of creative and also addressing the very particular challenge of sustainability and climate change?
Now, for a long time, indeed, a lot of the policies that were implemented in the EU, but also in other OECD members, were what we would call lose-lose. They wouldn't raise incomes of farmers, and they would not support the environment. So there was definitely room for a lot of improvement there. In 2020, we estimate that producer support to the agricultural sector was of the magnitude of $700 billion US. And the majority of this was both distortive, so distorting competition, and not necessarily helping the incomes of farmers. So it's not the kind of policy you want. Definitely in many countries, and the EU is taking an important lead role there, the emphasis on environmental sustainability has increased. There is an acknowledgement that the climate risk is becoming more and more important for farmers like Benedict, but also for farmers in the developing world, and ultimately for those of us living in our countries. So something has to be done to address this, and it has to happen rapidly. At the OECD, we support our member countries in this change.
Right. Well, thank you very, very much indeed for that, Marion. I want to turn to Karina now. Karina, you've got a long career in academia and think tank work. You take a global perspective on this. So I want you to tell me what you think when we're talking about food systems and the challenge of climate change, meeting that challenge, what you think is the most important message that you want to get across today.
Yes, I mean, I think I really welcome Catherine's intervention, and a point I noted, she mentioned that the agricultural system has been designed with maximum output of a few high-profit crops in mind. It is time for a change. And for me, that's really powerful because she really gets to the root cause of the unsustainability of our food system here, in my view, which is corporate control. And essentially a food system that's arranged around the enabling of corporate profit as its guiding principle. And in my view, what this does, it ends up trumping all other considerations, including environmental impacts, including good nutrition, the so-called externalities in the corporate talk. And really that precludes a food system geared towards other goals, and the goals that we all know we want. We all, we want better nutrition, we want ecological renewal, restoration, and a stable climate. So for me, the critical shift that needs to happen, the main barrier here is this move away from the corporate profit paradigm as the organizing principle towards a new principle, one where the food system is geared towards delivering secure nutrition, good nutrition for all, while minimizing environmental impact and, better still, environmental enhancement. And so if we move towards that principle, we would want decision makers, we want policies and incentives towards that mechanism, rather than the current setup that we have, which is policies and mechanisms that enable corporations to externalize these environmental and social impacts with impunity. So for me, that's really the missing piece here. That this recognition that what is grown, what is eaten, our food culture are really shaped by a few multinational corporations that are not necessarily delivering the good nutrition that we need while enhancing the natural world.
But Karina, if I'm to take your argument to its extreme, you seem to be saying that capitalism cannot and will not deliver the sustainable food systems that the planet needs. Is that your conclusion? Because if that's the conclusion, it means...
Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure we need a revolution, but we certainly need a transition to a post-capitalist, post-corporate economic system. That is true throughout the economy. This is the root cause, ultimately, of economic growth, being the root cause of environmental degradation and climate change. It's even more true in the food system, I would say, where the urgency is the greatest. Take one example, the meat sector. We know we need to massively reduce our meat consumption. This is not a controversial position. The IPCC agrees on this. The Eat Lancet report agrees on this. And yet, meat is currently chiefly produced by 35 meat corporations that all have growth ambitions. Since they are largely publicly traded, they have responsibilities to their shareholders. And we know that the growth trajectory of those corporations puts us on a collision path with a stable climate and biodiversity preservation. So yes, this is exactly what I'm saying, that there is this inherent tension between the capitalist corporate profit motive and good nutrition, and of course restoring remaining ecosystems and stabilizing the climate. That is what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah, Karina, I love it. You don't know this because you can't see the multi-screen I've got, but on our multi-screen right above you is a representative of this corporate world with which you have such a problem. Eric Vierwald has been waiting patiently for his contribution. He, of course, is the CEO of Syngenta Group, and Eric, it's a pleasure to have you join our panel, and I'm sure you were listening very, very carefully to what Karina was just saying. I put it to you, thanks to Karina's contribution, that you and big agribusiness corporations such as Syngenta are a fundamental part of the problem, not the solution.
Well, I would say that it requires massive innovation to solve these major challenges for the world. And I think private enterprise, together with NGOs, together with governments, all helping farmers, as Benedict talked about, we must help farmers to be the solution. And I think we all have an important role to do that. But let me talk about food systems, because I, like Catherine and like Dr. Chu before her, believe that food systems must adapt in a major way to make sure there's enough food for everybody, despite the impact of climate change. And let me tell you, this is not some future threat we're talking about here. We are already seeing record heat, droughts, and flooding, and more frequent storms than we've ever seen before. And these are challenging the ability of farmers everywhere to grow enough healthy food in a safe, environmentally friendly way. And we need innovations to help them. So let me give you a couple of examples. In September 2019, I was visiting our Fields of Innovation event in the Netherlands, where much of the world's vegetables and flowers are grown. One farmer came up to me, his name was Thomas, and told me that he had a problem with an insect that he had never seen before eating his tomatoes. He showed the insect to me and said that the Syngenta agronomist who shared a picture of the small white fly with our global network was able to figure out from our experts in South America that it was a Tuta absoluta fly, something that came from Central America that had never been seen in the Netherlands because of winters that had stopped their progression. But now with global warming, these and other pests are moving further and further north. Another example is fall armyworm, an insect that's devastating to maize and in other crops, and it's now widespread in China. It was never there before until 2 years ago. And then finally, yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with a U.S. farmer telling me about the horrendous drought challenges in the U.S. western states, and these are causing record forest fires. It's only springtime, and he worries about the viability of his farm and needs our help and the help of others. In Australia now, which has seen the worst drought in history, it now sees horrific flooding. And it's just incredible what farmers have to face. So this is a real threat, not just to farmers' livelihoods, but to our global food supply. And the vulnerability of the food supply was highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And by the way, in the last year, the average grain prices are up 40%, which especially is difficult for the poor. Now, the agriculture model we have used so far is not sustainable because of these weather extremes. And also, agriculture is responsible for 12% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And this needs to be decreased by at least 50% by 2030, so we in agriculture can help achieve the Paris Agreement goals. Now, fortunately, history shows us that agriculture is up to big challenges. Once highly inefficient and unpredictable, farming has been revolutionized by innovation, with major advances in seeds, crop nutrition, and crop protection over the last 60 years. Since 1960, food production has more than tripled, while land use is up only 13%. And pesticide use on farmland has fallen by 95%, thanks to safer, more effective pest control solutions. And today, agriculture is one of the few sectors that can make a choice to go from being a net emitter of carbon to becoming a net sequesterer. So we believe in regenerative agriculture, which some call nature positive agriculture. And this is an approach to not just bring specific technologies, but farming practices that help achieve the outcomes we all want. And these outcomes include higher yields, so we don't need as much land, capturing carbon in the soil, of course, protecting biodiversity, reducing irrigated water in water-limited areas, and continuing to reduce the volume of crop protection products and fertilizer. Now, the practices I'm talking about include low or no-till farming, enabled by modern seeds and herbicides to control weeds. This keeps carbon in the soil, helps the soil better hold water, and enriches it by diversifying its microorganisms, building healthier, nutrient-rich soils. Another practice is using cover crops between seasons, which also increases carbon in the soil and better protects it from erosion during off-season. Improved crop rotations can also help replenish soil to keep it healthy. And while these types of practices are not new in themselves, when we put them together with the right seeds, crop nutrition, and crop protection products, both synthetic chemistry and new biologicals, as well as with digital tools, we can achieve the outcomes we want. And this is why Syngenta has committed investing $2 billion in regenerative agriculture breakthroughs over 5 years. But we also need forward-thinking agriculture policies like building carbon credit markets that reward farmers for outcomes they achieve by adopting climate-friendly practices. Then we can not only reduce agriculture's net emissions, but potentially reverse them. And by making agriculture more sustainable, we can feed the world and be an important part of the solution to climate change. We can do this, but we need to do it all together, and we need to bring more and more innovation to agriculture.
Phrases like nature positive agriculture, they slip off the tongue really well and they sound terrific, but Karina's point was that in the end, your prime motive is to serve your shareholders and maximize profit. And to maximize profit, you constantly need to be encouraging farmers to use inputs that are based on your products. And for many of us, it's a little difficult to believe that you're quite as sort of holistic and selfless as a corporation as you've just described yourself. Why should we believe that you are prepared, maybe even to jeopardize the interests of your shareholders to be part of this collective effort to find a more sustainable agriculture?
The mission of the Syngenta Group is one thing. It's to help farmers safely feed the world and take care of our planet. That is what we're all about. And let me give you one example. So we're in the crop protection business, the pesticide business. Over the last 60 years, we have reduced the volume of pesticides per hectare of land by 95%, bringing out better and better chemistries. We're going to do that again in the next 10 years. And we're going to do that through better chemistry, through complementary biologicals, and through things like imaging, where you tell where the pests are and you spray only where the pests are and not broadly. I'm telling you, we care about the environment. We care about helping farmers protect the environment. It's the only environment we have. There's no planet B. We have to protect this world, and we have to feed a growing population. And we want to do it with less land, so we stop deforestation and reforest land instead of needing more farmland to feed a growing population. So those are our commitments. That's what 49,000 people of Syngenta wake up every morning to do. We've got 4,000 agronomists that are out there in the field. Their only job is to help farmers be successful. And where they use our products, it's great, and we keep coming out with new innovations. But our goal is to help farmers feed the world and take care of our environment.
All right, very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to take a very quick time out to remind you all, and we have got some questions coming in, but we want more. So ask the questions using the question box on the platform that you're all using today. There is a question box there. You can also ask questions via Twitter. Just use the hashtag FFA2021, and that will get you to a place where you can just use that to ask a question that will be picked up by the team here who are monitoring Twitter. So I'm going to continue my questioning of our four great panelists, but I'm also very keen to engage with everybody so that everybody's got a chance to chip in. So I'm going to take a couple of questions right now. First question that's come up on our screens is this one. Panelists, listen to this very carefully. The question is, given that consumers face very limited choices in many cases when it comes to food, mainly determined by supermarket buyers, What can individual consumers realistically do to reduce their CO2 footprint when it comes to food? It's interesting because so far we've discussed, you know, the different elements of this sustainable agriculture debate. We've discussed it in terms of the farmers, where we've got Benedict. We've discussed it in terms of policymakers and government. We've discussed it in terms of the big corporations. We haven't actually talked about you and me, ordinary members of the public and consumers, and how the consumers fit into this whole debate about a more sustainable food system. So Benedict, I'm going to come back to you. You're a farmer, you're producing food. You obviously have to think about the way food is consumed as well, because that's your marketplace. What do you think consumers should be thinking and doing as we talk about more sustainable food systems?
Thank you for the question. Before I answer that, I have to go back, unfortunately, to what Eric said, because I can't leave it hanging in the room. First of all, I was actually quite disappointed by the statement, because of course you know all the right words and you mentioned them beautifully, and cover crops are a great thing, and I could go into detail for hours and hours of many of the things that you mentioned, and as I said, not from a positive point of view, but from a very critical one. But just one thing to clarify, if you talk about helping farmers, helping means you give something for free. You try to solve a problem with something. If you let someone pay for help, it's not help, it's selling a product, right? That just as a standard to get that right. Apart from that, I think, you know, as far as the consumer is concerned, it really depends. I think what technology does bring, at least in some parts of the world, is that you are able to really get all the information that you need in order to take informed decisions. So what does food have an influence on my health and the health of my family? Well, how does the way this food has been produced relate to, let's say, the nutritional benefits of that food? And has that way of production had an influence on the livelihood of the farmer or the livelihood of the rural population? And if I do care about sustainability, if I do care about biodiversity and so forth, then I can use that information to try to support products that are in line with my value and belief system, right? And I mean, I am aware that this is also, in a sense, a privileged discussion, but it has to start somewhere. And we, let's say, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have the possibility to take that that informed decision, and thus support farmers and communities that are farming with nature, increasing biodiversity, increasing carbon in the soil, and thereby producing food that is very nutritious. And they do that not by massive innovation from the industry, but they do that because they understand the complexity of ecosystems, and they understand that they have to close the nutrient cycles to have less chemical inputs.
But just as a point of detail, Benedict, do you produce at Gut and Bursel, do you produce livestock, meat? Are you in the meat industry?
Well, I mean, we have cows that we manage holistically that close our nutrient cycle, and they are introduced into the whole crop rotation that we have. So therefore, we have a closed loop system. In addition to that, we have over 5 different syntropic agroforestry systems, which also incorporate livestock, because this is what it comes down to. If we are so intelligent as we as humans believe to be, we would not be paying for something that is being synthetically producing an incredible amount of negative externalities, but we would use the beautiful combination of trees with plants and animals in a sense that works beautifully together, having symbiotic relationships, thereby drastically decreasing the need of any kind of synthetic fertilizer or pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc., because these are being caused and caused in the first place by monocultures.
Right, but if we're to take that seriously, what you've just described as your production values, then the price of food is going to have to rise markedly, isn't it? If the whole world were to adopt the practices that you say you adopt in your farming system, because it's quite an expensive way of producing. And I'm just wondering, I just want to bring others in. I want to bring Marion in. Marion, do you believe, when you look at from the OECD perspective at how these systems work, do you believe that food is fairly priced, or that the pricing system doesn't work, that the emissions and carbon value intrinsic to certain foods isn't actually there, so that the consumer isn't really faced with choices that are, sustainable when it comes to their weekly supermarket food shop? What do you think needs to happen in terms of consumption, in terms of the pricing of food?
Well, coming back to Tom, Catherine used externalities, the environmental externalities are clearly not fully priced into the system. I would be surprised if anybody questions that. So this is currently not the case. We not only is the externality not priced in, many countries are still subsidizing fossil fuels. So we are subsidizing some of the materials, the ways of production that are damaging for the environment. So at OECD, we are looking at these things, and we are very actively working on addressing this. We are proposing, for instance, carbon pricing schemes, and are discussing this with governments at the international level. These discussions, this research, these consultations, this consensus finding is going on as we are speaking. So there is work happening in that direction. It has been too slow over the past years, and we need to speed this up. One reason why it is slow is that we are not only dealing here with the facts, facts like agriculture is responsible for part of the carbon emissions, that still 2 billion of people do not have regular access to sufficiently nutritious food. We are not only dealing with facts, we are dealing with different interests, and maybe with Benedict and Eric, we have two different interest groups here in this discussion, and we are dealing with different values. And the meat example has been mentioned here. In my own family, it's a very active discussion: how much meat, not at all, what type of meat, where to buy it. Different families, different countries, different societies have different values. So the policymaker needs to find the right answer, that the best solution, the best compromise on the basis of facts, and that's where we as OECD have an important role. But trying to compensate these different interests, that can sometimes be done through monetary exchanges, but also find the best compromise for the value in your society. And values we cannot necessarily address with money. It's something we can address with information. Benedict referred to this, with education, in order to inform about the values that as a society we consider to be now the one that represents the full society. And I would like to maybe finish by another point. I do not believe that this is a Northern Hemisphere issue. This problem of climate change is very present in the developing and emerging world. 2 years ago, I was working, Stefan, for an UN organization, for the United Nations. So we were working with developing countries. And on a Friday, I was sitting in my office and I just received data from a survey among farmers in the Gambia. And on that same Friday, I was at the phone with my daughters. Now, the survey from the Gambia, a least developed country, showed that over half of the farmers are very concerned about climate change. 40% were taking action, smallhold farmers, to deal with climate change. And the discussion with my daughters at the phone in Switzerland I was living was about whether or not they can participate in the Fridays for Future demonstration. So this is adolescent kids in Switzerland having the same concern as farmers in the least developed countries. This is a global and intergenerational problem. We now have to tackle it.
Okay, thank you, Marion. I want to bring in another question. I'm going to put this to Karina, then I've got one for Eric. But Karina, I don't know if this is a fair characterization, but you tell me if you think it's unfair. I think you perhaps represent the most radical voice on our panel. I mean, that's not meant in any negative sense at all. But your opening statement was a declaration that, you know, the system as it works currently is absolutely not going to solve the problems we face in finding a pathway to a truly sustainable global food system. And so the question that has come up, and I'm going to put it to you, is it's again about meat, but it's perhaps philosophically an even more broad question. The question is, how can the mass production of meat be changed to reduce its contribution to climate change? So I suppose really it's saying, can the mass production of meat be a part of a long-term sustainable global food system? I wonder whether you are of the view that actually some forms of agriculture just have to be, you know, priced out of existence or cancelled altogether. What is your feeling?
Absolutely. That is absolutely my view. I think we need to recognise that the food system, the food economy as we currently have it, was developed in conditions that no longer apply, in conditions where planetary boundaries had not yet been breached, and in conditions where the climate was stable. In those conditions, we had the fossil fuel companies, we had agribusiness, in particular meat production. We now know that, and just to clarify here, Benedict, I'm talking about industrial meat production, the kind of the worst types, large-scale facilities, where feed is imported in rather than integrated into the landscape, where there's no nutrient cycling. So the poster boy for this would be the American feedlot style. So these kinds of companies, that kind of industrial meat production, in my view, is as incompatible with a sustainable world as coal extraction, for several reasons. Obviously, essentially they produce huge amounts of emissions throughout. You know, producing meat in that way produces huge amounts of emission. We need feed, typically soy, that's been linked time and time again to deforestation in the Cerrado. Obviously, there's transport, there's methane emissions, and so on. So in my view, we are moving towards plant-rich diets, not exclusively plant-based diets, but we know that this is the type of agriculture that we need to get rid of altogether. There is no place for a JBS, for a Cargill, in a sustainable world with a stable climate, in my view. That does not mean that there is no meat at all. As Benedict has described, there is a place for meat within a regenerative system. Perhaps some eggs, perhaps some chickens when they contribute to nutrient cycling. So, do we need to get rid of some sectors of the agricultural sector altogether? Yes, absolutely. Meat would be industrial meat is at the top of that list. There are others as well. You know, I can point out to sugar in the UK, for example. We produce vast amounts of sugar in the UK. It's kind of crazy. It's really, really bad for our soils. It's a crop that is actively bad for us. We are over-consuming massively. All adults in the UK over-consume sugar, and children. It's costing our healthcare system billions. And it's destroyed our bee colonies, and we're producing it to generate profit for ABF, a sole monopoly corporation. So yes, we do need to review, you know, what are climate-friendly diets, what are diets aligned with the Paris agreements, and what does this mean for existing players in agribusiness?
But I just wonder, you know, how you choose your fights and which hills you choose to die on, because, you know, with the best will in the world, just saying that industrial meat production needs to be closed down around the world, it's a hugely powerful statement, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon. So
I would disagree. I would disagree. The reality is, of course, the idea of having to phase out fossil fuels when that was first put forward by environmental activists 20 years ago was dismissed as crazy. We are now closing coal mines. There are commitments to going fossil fuel free. Governments and companies are signing up to be net zero and decarbonizing the economy. It's a natural evolution, applying that kind of thinking to high polluting industries and energy, to applying it to other sectors, in particular food and agribusiness. So I really think the choice before us is, do we want to keep companies in business that are destroying the planet in business, or do we want to start making a plan to phase them out? I am highly confident that the big meat corporations will go the same way as big oil and big coal. We're already seeing some banks and financial institutions excluding them from their lending portfolios because of deforestation risks and climate risks. So in terms of which hills to climb on, it is quite clear when we think about what is a Paris-aligned diet and what does that mean for dietary change and what are the implications for incumbent players, it is clear which sectors of the agricultural and food system need to go.
Okay, well, Karina, very powerful stuff. Thank you very much for that. Eric, I'm going to bring you back now with a question which actually also relates to what Benedict was saying to you a little bit earlier. I mean, saying through me, I suppose, but I almost want to set up a direct conversation between the two of you. So the question is this. Technology, as you have said in your opening remarks, can play a major role, but the real question is, how will farmers, especially those in the developing world, pay for all of the things that are being talked about, the robotic technologies, the new seeds, all of the stuff that the Syngenta Group is working on? As Benedict pointed out, you're not giving it away for free. You're looking to make healthy profits out of all of this stuff. And in the developing world in particular, farmers have no margin, and they're certainly not interested in spending a huge amount of money they can't afford on your new technologies. So how are you going to roll out these technologies in a way that is equitable and sustainable?
So first of all, I would love the chance to meet with you, Benedict, and have a conversation, because we're open to talking to everybody, and it's important that we support all farmers around the world. So let's just first of all step back and say I think we have the same outcome goals that everybody else here has. We want a sustainable world where we can feed headed towards 8 billion, headed towards 10 billion people, and do it in a way that protects our environment. We want reduced greenhouse gas emissions. We want carbon neutral agriculture. We want less farmland. We want to protect the forests. We want to protect biodiversity. And we want less pesticides. We only want pesticides that are needed to be used. So I think there's a lot more commonality than you might be hearing right here today, right now. But let me talk about this. So let me give you an example. So back in fall of 2019, I spent a week in India, including visiting our site there where we're training women in agriculture in India to be agri-entrepreneurs to help local growers grow more food. And I visited a farmer. His name is Rajiv. He's a chili pepper farmer. And he showed me, we were a bit late because we were visiting many farmers. And we got there at night, and he had a flashlight he brought out with him, and he wanted to go out and show me his chili pepper field. And he was telling me about how the higher temperatures in India had decimated his yields, and how new seeds from Syngenta had helped revive his yields, and he was able to grow successful chili pepper crops. Chili peppers that were bigger, better tasting, and got him more money for them. And then he brought me back to a small house. He brought his son out, and he put his arm around his son, and with tears in his eyes, he said he was able to afford to send his son to medical school. And to me, that's what it's all about, helping farmers. And we spend $1.7 billion a year in research. And when we come out with new products, our model is to make sure that they're more profitable for farmers, that the farmers get more of the benefit than we do. So we came out with a new product called Adepidin, which is a fungicide to help farmers deal with really important diseases that they have to control. It's used 20% less to have the same benefit or more benefit because some of the diseases are not controlled by older insecticides or pesticides. So we always try to bring out new technologies that help farmers do better and help the environment. That's what we're committed to. And it's poor farmers around the world, and it's farmers in the developed world. Our model is support farmers to do better and protect the environment.
Benedict was listening to that very carefully. I was watching it on my screen. He was listening very carefully, and there was a wry smile playing on his lips at times, and I wasn't quite sure what that smile meant. So let's find out. Benedict, you sort of laid into big corporate agribusiness interests like Syngenta in your opening remarks. Now that you've heard Eric really expand on what he does and what motivates him and how he sees the future of Syngenta's cooperation with farmers in the developing world to really deliver on affordable, sustainable food system production, do you buy it?
Good question. I mean, with all honesty, we live in a complex world. I think we are all aware of that. And, I think when it comes to companies like Syngenta, it is always easy to say company XYZ is doing this good and that bad. And for sure, they are. There's things that are going well and that we can as a society be grateful for, but there are an incredible amount of things that go bad at this point. And in the end of the day, it is always people. It is the people who change things. It is the people who take responsibility. It is the people who take up and say, okay, I'm going to engage my group of managers and my employees and convince them of a new way, of a different way, of different needs that we have. And, like when it comes to on the personal level, I respect Eric absolutely. And he has his role to play and he has his people to please in a sense. So I believe that from the situation that he is in with the interests that he stands for, he believes, or you believe, Eric, I can directly address you. You believe what you're doing is right, and that as I said, there's things that you are doing right, but at the same time, I think what we need in our day to day is humbleness. Like there is just for everyone noticeable so many things that are going wrong, and I would just love for a company like Syngenta with that much power to stand up and say, look, people, we have a problem and we are part of that problem, but we know what we're doing wrong and there is certain ways of how we can do it better. And we take a leap of faith, we take responsibility more than just saying, we stand for regenerative agriculture because this is the new word. So I think, saying is easy, doing is more difficult. And I think we all of us can do more than we say. And I think we need more, to be honest with you.
So you know what? This reminds me a little bit of the debate we've been having through the pandemic about the race to find vaccines and help the world recover from COVID-19. A big bunch of quote-unquote big pharma companies joined the effort to find a vaccine. Now, one of those companies, AstraZeneca, chose to do it pretty much as a non-profit for the duration of the pandemic, but the others, including Pfizer, Moderna, and the rest, hope to turn a tidy profit out of their amazing science and the development of amazing vaccines. But the point is, the profit motive in big pharma is arguably very important to driving the best innovative science. And I'm saying that because the questions come up, and I want maybe Karina to address this, because when we're talking about driving more sustainable food production, we do need the very best of cutting-edge technologies, the kinds of technologies that Syngenta and many other companies are working upon. And the question that's come in from the audience is, if we got rid of the Syngentas of this world, who would replace what they do? I mean, we need a lot of what they do. So if you're removing the profit motive, the big corporates, who's going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't overstate the role of the private sector necessarily in innovation. Obviously, a lot of research happens in universities, as was the case with the AstraZeneca vaccine in terms of that analogy. So I think what businesses do well, what the corporations do well, is commercializing innovation, right? Is finding a way to make it profitable, standardizing it, and finding a way to distribute it. I think in terms of where the analogy with the pharmaceutical sector falls down a bit is that there's an assumption here that we need more innovation in the food sector and then the agricultural sector, which I'm not sure is the case. There are other ways to achieve the goals that Eric speaks of in terms of feeding the world, which is obviously what we want to do, and in terms of creating space for nature, for rewilding and afforestation. Do we need cutting edge technology to do this? Not necessarily. The main gains for these goals of feeding the world and making space for nature could be achieved through dietary change, as we've already explored, so through a massive reduction in meat consumption in high-income industrialized countries, but also crucially, something we haven't mentioned here at all yet, and it's a big part of the puzzle, through food waste prevention. So this is by far the lower-hanging fruit. A third of the food that's produced is never eaten, with huge environmental impact. So simply halving meat consumption and halving food waste would enable us to massively reduce our emissions. The UK government's modelling suggests about 88% reduction of agricultural emissions, while freeing land for afforestation. So we're not necessarily after high-tech solutions, I don't think, when it comes to food production and agriculture. We can focus on diets. We can also focus on food waste prevention first.
Yeah. Eric, either you're being very friendly or you want to get in with a comment. But if you do want to get in a comment, make it quick, because I've got something I want to ask Marion and we're running short of time. So go for it quickly.
Okay, we believe strongly in the 2 points that was just made. Dietary change, very important. And we're supporting with breeding technologies, new seeds to help plant-based meat companies do better, have better tasting products with less ingredients. One, on food waste, we also believe we have to cut down on food waste. One is on the farm, increasing yields on the farm so there's less food waste on the farm. Another example is we're the leaders in the world in tomato seeds. We're now breeding tomato seeds not just for yield and taste, but also for shelf life. So we're adding 1 or 2 weeks of shelf life dramatically reduces the waste in the tomato value chain. So we're absolutely committed also to dietary change and food waste through innovation that is better for consumers.
All right. Thank you for that, Eric. I want to introduce one more big thought that is coming to me because of the pandemic, because of things we've seen through the pandemic. As we watch the vaccine rollout around the world, a lot of us are hoping and praying that international cooperation isn't just rhetorical but becomes real. And one of the agencies that may or may not work as a part of that is the COVAX agency, which is trying to ensure that vaccination is rolled out to the poorer countries who haven't been able to procure their own supplies of vaccine through the open marketplace because they simply don't have the money. But they can be part of a joint collaborative effort, largely financed from the rich world, to get the vaccine sent out to the poorer, the more disadvantaged nations of the world. I just wonder whether, Marion, whether you see any scope for that sort of genuine cooperative, collaborative relationship when it comes to food systems and combating hunger in a sustainable way. That is, can the rich world, which is perhaps better placed to develop sustainable food production systems quickly, can it help the poorer parts of the world, both by giving technologies, if technology is relevant, but also, frankly, by redistributing food in a more equitable way? I mean, is this something that is just pie in the sky, or is it realistic?
I think we have seen in this pandemic the best and maybe also a bit of the worst of international collaboration. We have seen first that collaborative processes that we put in place after the great financial crisis have had very positive effects during this pandemic. I'm thinking here of the agricultural market information system that was put in place after the great financial crisis. It's a simple web portal where you can see the prices of major crops. I'm thinking of rice, I'm thinking of corn. You can see which export restrictions are in place, but also you can see how much of the crop is available on global markets. And when in the beginning of the pandemic, policymakers started to be nervous, markets started to become jittery, started to think, oh, there will be a shortage of food, prices started to go up, we could show there's no reason for panic. There's enough food around. The harvests have been good. No need for prices to shoot up now. And markets stayed calm in the second and the third quarter of last year. So there we worked together. We had put in place a mechanism after a bad experience, and that mechanism worked. During the COVID-19 crisis, the G20 ministers, I think, have given a very interesting and powerful example. I'm thinking of the trade ministers. They came together 3 times in 1 year, and 3 times they brought together a joint communique. And when you have been working on trade, like I have been doing in the past years, you have gone through a period where trade ministers found it very hard to agree on anything. And there, 3 times they agreed on a text. 3 times they said, if you put measures in place to restrict trade, do it carefully, do it temporarily, keep in mind that it's important for things to keep flowing. There was a real sense of urgency and for need to collaborate. Now, in the vaccine situation, we are not seeing that great collaboration yet. Here we are in a situation where many complicated issues are coming together. Innovation has to happen rapidly. That requires investment. The new products have to be certified. You have to make a trade-off between how sure are we that this is safe and how many doubts do we still have. There are market players who have a certain market power, who are now have a role in distributing the vaccine, and there are policymakers who, quite frankly, have to be responsible, feel they have to be responsible above all for their own voters before they think of others. This is complex, has to be solved very rapidly. The collaboration is not ideal yet. We very much hope, and at OECD we are supporting this collaboration in order to work together more rapidly, because it will be key to solve this global crisis.
Yeah, but my question is whether we've seen the problems in vaccine rollout, but are we realistic to expect in the longer run that, given we all agree that finding a pathway to a more sustainable climate change friendly system of food production around the world matters to each and every one of us, are we sure that the rich world is prepared to do what it takes to help the poorer parts of the world get to where they need to be?
I think yes, because as I said before, this is an issue that we are all facing around the globe. This is not a north-south issue. And whereas I do think that Benedict and Eric's interests, economic interests, are not necessarily aligned, I do believe that Eric's company has a big interest to start to work hard on these environmental questions, because it's clear to everybody right now that this problem is urgent. So I do believe there's a sense of urgency. We see policymakers moving across the globe, in the north, in the south, in the west, in the east. We are seeing private sectors players also reacting, and we are seeing consumer organizations, NGO, picking this topic up. Nevertheless, it will be difficult to find consensus. Interests and values are not always aligned. One of the approaches we have had a very positive experience with is bringing arbitrarily chosen groups of citizens together and have them take decisions on how to align interests and values. So not just discuss on what are our opinions, but tell them, well, you have to help in taking the decisions. Which policy would you introduce? And if you take a randomly well-representative group of citizens, you often can get a situation where you have a good representation of the different interests and values in your society, and that helps you to come to a decision and to design this policy package that helps us to meet environmental objectives, income requirements for farmers, and also nutritional objectives for our population.
All right. Well, Marion, thank you very much. You just touched on sort of north-south issues, which we're going to touch upon even more in the next few moments. We unfortunately, panel members, we've run out of time for this panel. I have to say, I found it really stimulating, enjoyable, insightful. I really thank you, all 4 of you, for bringing your experience to this discussion and being not necessarily all on the same page, but discussing it with frankness and great good spirit. So thank you to Marion, to Eric, to Benedict, and to Karina. We've really enjoyed your contributions. Thank you all very much indeed. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think that really laid out very well the different and sometimes challenging perspectives that there are on this issue of how we get to a more sustainable food system. And the issue isn't just long-term, it is indeed very urgent. And as Marion was pointing out there, this shouldn't be a sort of north-south, a rich against poor issue, but the fact is that while the industrialized world is historically responsible for most of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, which are causing the climate change which we now all have to take so very seriously. Historically, it is the industrialized world who produced the greenhouse gases, but many of the worst impacts are being felt in the less industrialized, the more developing economy parts of the world, and in particular being felt in food systems, agriculture and rural economy systems in those poorer parts of the world.